Much awaited news, Alex Karaban back to UConn for next season, but Leaf, Aidan Mahaney, not so much.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Wednesday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shader, joining me at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listen or watch. Want to remind you, you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all the everydayers joining us, all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord as well. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Oh man, it is a live Wednesday show. It is noon on the East Coast. Thanks for joining us live. For those of you that are, if you're watching or listening back later, what's up? We're glad you are here as well. Joining me today is our good buddy Leaf Tulane. Always great to be together. I know Leaf is thick in the midst of it as we get into NBA draft season here. And that's part of what we're talking about today. The NBA draft early entry deadline has come and gone. Man, crickets on that thing. We'll talk about why that is and what the numbers were, because now we know that. We're also going to discuss the ACC possibly moving from 20 down to 18 conference games next season to help get more teams in the NCAA tournament? Interesting. But we got to start. Leaf. We said that NBA early entry deadline came and went Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Eastern time was the deadline, and nothing from Alex Karaban, which we know it doesn't have to be. You just got to get your paperwork in by that point. But then it was days and days before we heard anything. Finally on Tuesday, we learned Alex Karaban coming back for the second year in a row to run it back for his senior year this time around. Leaf, what do you make of the decision?
I'm happy as a basketball fan. Like, Alex Karaban has been one of the more decorated players because he won two championships, came back, and, the expectation was, UConn can win it all. And I came on here early last season and said, I don't know if they got the same talent, but Alex Karaban's a winner. Dan Hurley's got, he's got the juice to make them decent, but that's not a championship roster. And Alex Karaban's stock fell as a result of being from a fourth or fifth option on both of those championship teams to elevating to the number one option. He didn't necessarily shine. I would say he struggled in the number one option, but he still was a good basketball player. I thought that he would still have enough goodwill built up from those 2 years of playing a complementary role, which is what he'd be in the NBA, to be a respectable NBA draft pick. But in my heart of hearts, I thought, you know what? Why would you leave UConn with a chance with a reloaded roster and you get money to come back? And the longer it went on, the more I believed he'd come back to UConn, because it would be leaving UConn with a barren cupboard in his replacement. Yes, UConn could find a way to get a good player because them, like Duke, like North Carolina, they have the money and the cachet to go get a good player. But the longer that he stayed, and we were thinking, man, it's been a while, the more I thought he would come back, because it's unlikely you string along your team as far. And especially without going to the NBA Combine. Like, if you were to play great or poorly at the Combine, I think it becomes more clear. But in announcing before then, it makes you really think, he's got to be back. And so as a basketball fan, I'm back. I'm happy that he's back, and I'm back on the Alex Karaban being a very good player for UConn bandwagon, because he's fun to watch when he's playing well.
That's such a good point, Leaf, that you made about, like, his level of care and concern for UConn. He's not going to screw them over, right? And I know that part of the timelines are just weird, right? Like, if you're going to go through the process, you got to go through the process. And I know that puts a coaching staff in a tough spot because they need to backfill potentially. But I love that he just went ahead and has done it now. Leaf, one of my concerns last year is that, yes, you had McNeely coming in, and he was going to be a bit of a dude, but that Karaban really isn't this linchpin, this main central stud that you can just do it all. But he's such a great part of a bigger team when he's got a bunch of that talent around him. Do you still feel that way, or do you think that he can elevate his game enough ahead of a senior year to where he is more of that like dude that can be the dude, even if there's not other dudes around him. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, and I think it's probably somewhere in between. I think his game is perfectly carved out to be a third, fourth, fifth option. If you look at what the team was the first year, he was a spacer that really helped Adama Sanogo, would play a little bit with Donovan Clingan, who neither were shooters. Andre Jackson wasn't a shooter, so it was him, Tristan Newton, and the likes of Jordan Hawkins. The second national championship year, you had Spencer coming who could really shoot. You still had Tristan Newton, who was an All American, and he could really shoot. Then Donovan Clingan took an enormous leap. And then you still added a guy who just won Rookie of the Year of Stefan Castle, who wasn't a great shooter, but he had a lot of ability to attack downhill. So I would say he was the fifth best player in the first year, the fourth best player the second year, and maybe fifth and fifth, to be honest. So this past year, the expectation was he's going to be the best player. And I don't think it was a fair expectation because he's not someone who puts the ball on the floor and is a creator. I also think it led to Liam McNeely having a difficult task because he was supposed to be the third best player, plug and play, and instead he was asked to be the top guy. So this year, I think there is more help. Silas Demery takes a lot of pressure off. There's pressure taken off by the growth that you'd expect to come from someone like Terrace Reed internally in the front court. There's growth that could come from Stewart and Ross, who are both back as well. And so I do think he's going to be higher on the scouting report than his two championship years, but I don't think it's going to be as Herculean of an effort that he has to put in to make UConn win in the way that Dan Hurley expected them to win last year, because the roster will be constructed more conducively to Alex Karaban's strengths, just pick and pop and come off motion and shoot. I think at the worst part for him in evaluating him as a draft prospect is he's a really good shooter. I had the numbers up for I did a UConn episode, and he as a freshman shot about 90% from the line, 38% from three. Then as sophomore, he's 39% from three, really good shooting from the free throw line. Well, this past year, everything dipped, and I think it had to do with confidence as much as it had to do with elevation on the scouting report. He's missing shots because he's being defended better, and then when he got the open ones he was accustomed to, he was missing them because, oh my gosh, I got to make this my draft stock. Am I ever going to be drafted? Because now I'm shooting 33% as opposed to 39. And I think all that can go out of his mind.
Yeah. There's so much weight on his shoulders last year when that's coming. And I can't imagine that's got to be very difficult to deal with. Malachi Smith, obviously coming in as well as a guard coming over from Dayton. You got several freshmen coming in, kind of headlined by Braylon Mullins and Eric Ryba. And so really interested to see how UConn looks next year, coming off of the back-to-back national championships, not being as good. What is UConn 25-26 look like? Part of what they'll look like is Aidan Mahaney less. Leaf, I kind of hate it, but I feel like we looked at this and said, I don't know that this is a good fit coming into last year with him coming over from St. Mary's. I don't want to be right about those things. I would rather every player go places and shine, but it is our job to evaluate these things. And I think we saw that Aidan Mahaney wouldn't be able to be that. And that's what it turned out to be. Now, Leaf, he heads back to the West Coast where he will be at the UC Santa Barbara. I imagined Aidan Mahaney probably needed to go somewhere else, but wow. This was a shocker to me, Leaf. What do you make of it?
I mean, this dude he was the best player in the WCC. Like, I know Marshalonis won the award, but the number one on the scouting report was Aidan Mahaney in those years, and they were a 5 seed. Like, Aidan Mahaney was an excellent basketball player. Now, did he have some deficiencies in terms of athleticism that would be more exposed if he was the number one option on a Big East or an SEC? Absolutely. I was surprised how poorly it went, but I didn't like the fit, just like you said. I remember in his final couple, there was UConn and Creighton, and I was like, well, I know they're in the same conference, but Creighton seems to make a lot more sense. I remember thinking that. It's like, oh, you can take the ball and play point guard and wait for Ashworth to come flying off screens, and you can and it ended up being Pop Isaacs that they went for, and Pop Isaacs got hurt. But the idea was the same idea. You have a scoring-oriented guard who's not particularly physical, but because you have Ryan Kalkbrenner and some big wings that knock down threes, you got a chance. UConn just runs such a flowing offense where it's so critical to get the ball into those sets, and his inability to expose the physicality with which he was defended really trouble Dan Hurley. And then defensively, Mahaney couldn't stay up with teams targeting him. And I think the familiarity of the Big East and the physicality of when they're in league play really bothered Mahaney. And I don't think Dan Hurley had the option to play Aidan Mahaney. Yeah. And that was the starting part. Did I expect him to thrive? No, but to be unplayable was shocking.
That's a great way to put it, Leaf. I love it. Now he's going to go be a gaucho playing the Big West Conference, where I expect he's going to have a year, but it's like, how do you evaluate it? So that's going to be the tricky thing for next year. But keep your eyes locked on the Gauchos. We'll see what happens. Now, Leaf, prior to the transfer portal, the NBA early entry deadline used to strike fear into the hearts of every college basketball fan. Please let my guys go. Please don't let him go to the draft. But if he does, please let him come back. And now with the transfer portal, early entry deadline is kind of like, okay, it is what it is. We'll unpack that and why that might be coming up here in just a second. Right after I tell you about Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Because between dining out and online shopping and entertainment, it's really easy to lose track of where everything falls. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, and it gives you full visibility and control over all your finances. Monarch Money isn't just some budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, all your investments, and your spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money, and instead you actually start building wealth. And instead, I love that it is that one-stop shopping, because instead of having to have all these different multiple financial apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, to track your spending, and even plan long-term goals. My wife and I, we always want to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to finances. And I'm so thankful that Monarch Money makes that a lot easier than it used to be, because we can track shared accounts. If you and your partner have personal accounts in addition to that, you can do that. You can set goals. You can stay on the same page without all the stress. So if you want to check it out too, do that. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half your first year. Leaf, earlier this week on Locked On College Basketball, Andy Patton and I just talked about the early entry deadline for the NBA and how it was kind of a like, oh, that happened over the weekend, right? And there wasn't, we just talked about it. We talked about players that had entered and who were winners and all that kind of stuff. But Leaf, prior to the portal, we used to watch this thing like a hawk. And now that that's kind of shifted to the portal deadline being the thing that every college basketball fan is watching for, the early entry deadline has become very much an afterthought. I felt that this year more than any other year of the portal ever. And to prove it, the numbers bear it out. Leaf, let me read this tweet from Jonathan Gavoni, and then I want to get your reaction to it. This came out on Tuesday morning. Gavoni says, only 106 players entered the 2025 NBA draft early entry per the NBA. That's the lowest number of early entrants since 2015. That's a decade, down from a peak of 363 in 2021, just before the NIL era officially started. End quote. So, Leaf, this is a portal issue. It's an NIL issue. And we were, as recently as 4 off seasons ago, at 363 early entrants for 60 NBA draft spots. Now this year, down to just 106 early entrants. What do you make of it?
Well, we know the reason. It's NIL attracts players to come back. And as a college basketball fan, that's good. I do think there is a issue in the way that the portal's being abused. It's not just being used, it's being abused. We're seeing guys who have exhausted eligibility trying to come back. I do think there's issues in terms of players going, you know what, I can go from this school to this school and get marginally more money, and therefore it's better for me. And you know what, I can't say that money is something that these people shouldn't be chasing. I'm not saying that. I think it's becoming too often that too many players do so, not just individual cases. As for the NBA draft side of things, I was at the NBA Combine the last 2 seasons, and there are a lot of players you say, oh, that's peculiar that they came here and they were invited because, I expect them to go back to school. I'm not going this year, but I'd imagine the sentiment's going to be, I don't know if there's any guys here that we think aren't all in on going to the NBA draft. So mixing the two, I think it's interesting. It becomes an easier job to evaluate because you kind of know who's going to stay and who's not. But the portals become a center piece of college basketball, and the early entrant deadline, like the only ones that really intrigued me were how long it took Common Malawach and Carter Bryant to declare, because those guys are going to be lottery picks, or at least I feel very confidently in
Yeah,
both of
yeah.
them being lottery picks in my own evaluation. And they waited till the eve, like the pumpkin and Cinderella slipper was fitting like that. It was going crazy how long they took to go in there. That was all that intrigued me really. Whereas typically it's, oh my goodness, there's 300 people. Who's going to do it? And this college basketball team's going to lose a star, even if this guy's going to go 60th in the draft. I don't think anyone's doing that irrational confidence in college basketball fans. We should probably be delighted. As a draft evaluator, it felt a little weird.
And like there's a couple angles we got to look at as well. Like, it's good, as you said, for college basketball. Like, I love keeping for all of the like of NIL and transfer portal. I love that we're keeping so much talent in college basketball. And to be fair, a lot of that, 363 was the number. A lot of that ended up coming back eventually anyway. But we're keeping them in from the get-go. And I think that's big for chemistry and infrastructure and stuff like that. But I also think there's this, like, clearly when we had that, there were a bunch of guys staying in, even if they were going to be second round picks, because at that point it was more lucrative to go play in the G League or the D League before that, whatever. Now it's clearly more lucrative to stay in college than whatever you can make in the G League or on a two-way contract. And Leaf, I think there's an element of you got to get while the getting's good, because for so many of these young men and so many young women on the other side of it, this is the most earning power they will ever have in their entire lives right now, because you can make so much money in college basketball because there's no structure or restrictions around it. And so it's like, yeah, I'm not even going to sniff a second round potential right now, because I could stay in college and make $1 million or more dollars. And that's like, Leaf, also for me, $1 million one time would set me up for the rest of my life, because I could do all sorts of stuff to stock it away and whatever it is. And so if these guys can make $1 million or more dollars multiple times, no brainer, absolutely no brainer to me.
Yeah, no, and it changes the evaluation for sure, because some of these top guys, I know this is a little bit out of what we were talking about in the sense of JT Toppin wasn't taking it down to the wire of where to go, but he's getting $4 million as a college player. So he's a junior, right? He's a junior, and he played, and I'm going to guess he got probably $2 million this past year from Texas Tech, and I don't know, and probably not that much from New Mexico. But I saw him at the combine before this past season, and it was, hey, can this guy get drafted, or is there a world someone swings on his traits and says he's a first round pick because he's super athletic and young, or does he come back and then refine and become a true center, or does he become a better shooter, and all these things? And I don't know what other people thought, but I didn't think there was a chance in the world he was going in the first round that year. This year, I still didn't think it was all that likely, because he's a bit of a tweener. In the NBA, and what they prioritize doesn't prioritize his skill set. And now he gets $4 million. So $4 million is going to be more than what he could have gotten in the NBA. And yes, it's a guaranteed contract. And if you were the first round, you get 3-4 years out of it. Second round, if it's early enough, you get probably 3 years out of it. But let's say he goes back another year, all of a sudden he's at $8 million. And so it makes more and more sense. And I understand it for a lot of players. I do think the one downside to the portal coexisting with NIL is it becomes free agency. It becomes restricted free agency of, oh, this team said they'd pay me more, so let's leverage it. And I understand that's in the players' rights, but I don't think it's necessarily right for the programs trying to retain rosters. And, they have other people coming in, and there's less continuity due to greed. And that's my bother with what the portal coinciding with the early entrants and the NIL and all that. I think it becomes a greed-based situation, and it's like restricted free agency of amateur athletes. And I think there needs to be some sort of distinction of how to go about it. And I also think there needs to be a salary cap for each conference. I think each conference needs to play in the same playing field. So some some team can't say, yeah, you know what, we're going to pay 20 million. The other one's at 2 million as a total cap. I know there's basketball schools, there's football schools. That's always going to be the way it is, but they got to be on the same playing field if they're playing the same conference.
I like that a lot, Leaf. It doesn't have to be and shouldn't be uniform for all 360 plus teams. That just doesn't make sense. And one other factor I'll just mention in this, with so many guys staying in school, and yes, I know it's an afterthought, and yes, I know all the transfer portal stuff is an absolute headache for admissions departments and registrars' offices to handle the credits, but more kids staying in school, it does mean more education. It does mean more degrees, and it does mean guys setting themselves up well for after basketball. And so I know there's always going to be guys that dodge class and do that and whatever, but the guys that take advantage of this, it's like, while I'm at school making millions of dollars, I'm gonna go to class and like get a business degree to learn how to utilize those millions of dollars in a healthy and wise way, so that I'm not some, 3 decades from now, I'm not some guy that had a couple $1 million one time and now I'm broke, right? Like I just think that side of it is a complete afterthought for most people, but it's got to be something we talk about as well. All right, well, folks, the ACC is one of 4 power conferences that has been playing 20 conference games the last several years, and they're going to be voting to change down to 18 games as soon as this season, in an effort to help get more teams in the NCAA tournament. A thing that will actually help or actually change things for the ACC. Leaf and I are going to have that conversation coming up here in just a second. All right, Leaf, on earlier this week, we started getting some reports coming out that the ACC was investigating the possibility of shifting from a 20-game conference schedule to an 18-game conference schedule. This past year, 4 of the 5 Power 5 conferences, Big East, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, all had 20 games, while the SEC was the lone wolf to stay at 18. The thought for Commissioner Jim Phillips, after studying and analytics and stuff, is that a movement from 20 conference games down to 18 would allow teams to schedule more aggressively or differently in the non-conference, with having 2 more games of flexibility. That might ultimately help them land more teams in the NCAA tournament. Leaf, let's just start with that angle of it. Do you see that as something that could help the ACC in the postseason?
I'm not sure, to be honest, because the teams have to be good. And the teams, when the ACC were really good, it didn't matter who they played. They could play all ACC for 33 games and they'd still demonstrate the capacity and then the necessity to put them in the tournament. The one credence to is, I think, the bigger schools that have struggled in years past, but let's say North Carolina, they barely got in. If North Carolina gets 2 more non-conference games and they win one of them against a marquee program, it makes it easier for them to get in. In years past, Louisville has drawn teams that they can play against, and it won't be an issue anymore because they're good, they're humming, but they were terrible, and so they couldn't draw people. Miami could draw people, but they were losing. So it really means that the ACC needs to just get their teams playing well again. But I am fascinated by this idea. I know this isn't necessarily the intention, but my friend and I've talked about this for a couple months. Illinois and Duke played at MSG February 22nd. I wonder if there's a world in which, in the future of college athletics, where people are on these salary caps and it becomes more well documented of how to equalize the power conferences and all this, if they can set up a way to have a non-conference, like conference play is from December to February, and you play the conference tournament in March, but in between the conference tournament and the end of conference play, you play 2 or 3 non-conference games. So you play your 18, and then you play 2 non-conferences, and then you go to your conference play. Just like a little break. It'd be good for entertainment, and you play basically another ACC SEC or an ACC Big 10 in this case. And I think that'd be great for it. I don't think that's exactly what they're trying to implement, but I don't think implementing, hey, we're going to play 2 fewer games against conference necessarily guarantees you're going to get more in the tournament. Like, yeah, you'll save 2 losses, but you're also going to save 2 wins. It's the same thing with the SEC and the whole thing of like, oh, the SEC's so great, but they only have a 500 record. Of course they do. Like that whole thing that was on Twitter, and they were fooling
That's how math
commentators.
works.
Yeah, that's how math works. So it means some of your teams aren't going to be as good and some are going to be better by taking away 2 games. Of course that's going to happen. But then you get to marquee programs. But what about this Stanford? Like my favorite team. Stanford's not going to draw a marquee program by playing one fewer ACC game. In fact, they got a better chance of going into the Dean Dome and winning like they did this year. Like I think this is only favoring the teams like Duke and Carolina who can draw an Arkansas, who can draw a Kentucky. But I don't think it changes anything because those teams should make it anyway.
Yeah. And my question is, would they? Like, I like your thought of, like, if you're going to do this, having another like conference on conference matchup, because if you do it, but it's just like you're just allowing the teams to schedule whomever in those other 2 games, some schools are going to schedule big and some schools are going to just get cupcakes and walk all over them. And so, like, literally the only way the ACC could control it is if they come up with something with ESPN that's like, we're, to your point of like having another conference challenge, because otherwise each team has their own autonomy to schedule their own games. And so who cares if you have 13 non-con games instead of 11? That's what's going to happen there. And so I like that thought a lot, Leaf. I'm also very intrigued by your proposal of like a little saving those 2 games specifically for after conference season, because I think people grow weary of conference game after conference game after conference game, and so kind of bookending your regular season with non-con games has a lot of merit to it, I think, as well. And so I think that's the biggest thing, and I love that you found that point, because I hadn't thought of that if you're going to do this, you've got to find a way to regulate who those other 2 games are against. Otherwise, it's pointless. And I think the biggest point is the first point you made, Leaf. If the players and the coaches in this conference were better, all of this would be a moot point, and we would not even be having this conversation. And so if I'm the ACC and if I'm Jim Phillips, I'm trying to figure out, sure, let's put ourselves in the best situation scheduling wise. But before that, how do our schools attract the very best coaches, and how do our schools attract the very best players? Outside of that, I don't care what you do.
Here's a thought. Like, if Duke, Carolina, and Virginia were all 1 seeds in 2019, that's not this distant past. Like, that's fairly recent. And we've had players that graduated recently that were playing in those games. Like, that's how recent it was. And I know there was the COVID year that elongated eligibility.
Sure.
But there were players that recently played, and as recently as this show was airing, that played in those tournament games. That was 3 1 seeds for one conference. Virginia Tech, Florida State were 4 seeds. You had, or Virginia Tech might have been a 5. But my point being, those were really good basketball teams. And Duke has been the torchbearer the last couple years. North Carolina last year was a 1 seed, and this year barely got in the NCAA tournament. I would argue the legends of the game, coaching-wise, leaving has left the ACC in a worse spot than scheduling. Like, you look at Tony Bennett leaves, and that's the identity of Virginia. And then you look at the 10 years from 2012 to 2022. Well, yeah, there's Coach K, there's Roy Williams, there's Jim Larinaga, there's Jim Boeheim. Who had the best record? Tony Bennett. And it's not actually particularly close.
Right.
And then Duke gets John Shire, but that's the only one that I think has been a hit so far. Like, Hubert Davis made the Final Four, made the championship game. I would argue Hubert Davis has been terrible, like absolutely awful. And I haven't talked to you about this, but I think Hubert Davis has been keeping North Carolina toiling in mediocrity. And North Carolina is a program that you could say, you know what, lace it up and not coach, and they end up okay because they have that much talent. But you get a good coach, and that makes the ACC so much better because it's about programs. And now you get Louisville. Louisville gets Pat Kelsey. Pat Kelsey has them in year 1 relevant again. They got a huge recruiting class coming in. Jim Larinaga goes out, and they go out with a whimper. Syracuse has been terrible since Jim Boeheim's been gone. And honestly, they're pretty bad at the end of his tenure too. So my contention is that the coaches are what matter the most to the ACC, and then the scheduling will get better as those programs become the marquee names once again, because the marquee names fell off. Yeah. And what made the ACC so great for the 10 years prior was they had great coaches with great basketball programs. It hasn't been that. And so I don't care too much about the scheduling. I care about the coaching and the players, like you mentioned. But it's become an indictment on North Carolina the last couple of years to say, "Oh, we're barely getting in the tournament." Yeah, but he made the Final Four in his first season. Those were Roy's guys. It's the same thing at Miami. Jay Lucas now has all these guys. I'd be very curious to see how quickly he turns it around, because if you can get coaches at these programs, especially with the money that the programs will put in, then the ACC is going to be back regardless of they play 18 or 20 conference games.
Yeah. And I think the beginnings of it are happening. As you said, I think John Shire is going to keep it rolling, right? Like there, as you said, there ain't much you got to do at North Carolina. They should be doing it. The same is true at Duke. And I think John Shire has that humming. Pat Kelsey, I think, is going to be successful at Louisville. I think the Will Wade hire is great for NC State. And that's the thing. It's not just about these premier teams. It's about the lower level teams as well, or the teams that shouldn't be lower level but are right now. They got to rise back up. Like, why is Virginia Tech not better? Why is Wake Forest not sitting at the, like, all of this kind of stuff needs to happen. And so that's what we'll keep our eyes on. So Leaf, really interesting conversation. Again, the ACC is supposed to vote on this in May. And if it's voted in, it's going to happen for this upcoming 2025-26 season. And so we'll keep our eyes on that. But again, ultimately, if the teams are better, who cares what your schedules are? I think that is the biggest takeaway from Leaf and I on this. Gang, thanks so much for joining us here during the lunch hour. For those of you that are live in real time on a Wednesday, for those of you listening and watching back later, so glad you're here as well. If you've not subscribed to Locked On College Basketball on video and audio, make sure you do that now so you don't miss a second of the show all off season long, as we just talk about everything that's going on in the landscape of college hoops. We'll be back with you tomorrow again for the Thursday show, and then Andy and I on Friday to send you off into the weekend. If you've not subscribed to Locked On College Basketball on Discord, join that right now. The link is in the show notes. We'd love to have you there. As always, I want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Pope. Shouts to McBruins. And until tomorrow, peace.